A single meeting that altered an entire industry. It lasted less than an hour. No press release followed. No announcement leaked. And yet, when that meeting ended, the direction of an entire industry quietly changed forever. Most people imagine industry-shaping moments as dramatic events, hostile takeovers, massive launches, public collapses. But real transformation often begins in rooms with closed doors, where few people confront a truth that refuses to fit the existing narrative. This was one of those moments. At the time, the industry felt settled. Power was concentrated. Standards were established. The leaders at the top believed the future would look like a refined version of the past. And for years, that belief had been rewarded. Growth was predictable. Competition was manageable. Change was incremental. But beneath that calm surface, pressure was building. Customer expectations were shifting faster than the industry's response cycles. New technologies lowered barriers that once protected incumbents, and younger companies, unconstrained by tradition, experimented freely, sometimes failing, sometimes learning faster than anyone else. The system still worked, but it no longer felt inevitable. The meeting was called to address a narrow issue, a minor partnership concern, a routine strategic alignment. No one entered the room expecting disruption. Yet as the discussion unfolded, something unexpected happened. One question cut through the agenda, simple, direct, and deeply uncomfortable. What if the rules we're protecting no longer serve the people we depend on? The room fell quiet, because the question challenged the foundation of everything they had built. It wasn't about margins or timelines. It was about relevance, about whether the industry structure still aligned with how value was being created in the real world. This is where the reveal begins, because that single question reframed the conversation from defense to possibility. And once that shift occurred, the meeting stopped being routine. It became the moment when long-held assumptions were placed on the table, not to be refined, but to be questioned. And when those doors finally opened, nothing outside that room would ever look the same again. Once the question was asked, the meeting took on a different weight. The agenda faded into the background as the conversation shifted from tactics to foundations. Participants began revisiting decisions that had once felt obvious, now examined under a harsher light. Standards that governed the industry, incentives that shaped behavior, assumptions that no one remembered choosing, only inheriting. The reveal deepened. Data surfaced that rarely made it into formal reports. Customer complaints dismissed as edge cases. Adoption curves that plateaued earlier than expected. Signals from smaller players who were experimenting outside the established framework. None of it pointed to immediate collapse. But together, it revealed stagnation, a system optimized to protect incumbents, not to serve a changing market. Tension rose as perspectives collided. Some argued that stability was the industry's greatest strength. Shared rules created trust. Consistency reduced risk. Moving too fast could fracture the ecosystem and erode confidence. Others countered that the same rules now acted as barriers, slowing innovation, discouraging experimentation, and pushing the most ambitious creators to operate outside the system entirely. The conflict wasn't ideological. It was practical. Every proposed change threatened existing advantages. Every attempt at reform carried costs no one wanted to absorb. And yet, the evidence kept pointing in the same direction. The industry structure no longer matched how value was being created. Customers wanted flexibility. Partners wanted speed. Innovators wanted room to build without permission. Then came the moment that shifted the tone. One participant shared a projection based not on current leaders, but on emerging behavior. If the industry maintained its current rules, adoption would fragment. New platforms would rise outside the ecosystem. Trust would erode slowly, then suddenly. The industry wouldn't be disrupted by a single competitor. It would be bypassed. Silence followed. The realization was uncomfortable because it was plausible. Protecting the rules meant protecting relevance only in the short term. Changing them risked instability, but refusing to change guaranteed irrelevance. The meeting no longer felt theoretical. It felt urgent. And as the discussion deepened, the group began to understand that the decision in front of them wasn't about tweaking standards or issuing guidelines. It was about whether they would lead the transition into a new era or wait until it was imposed on them from the outside. The single meeting was becoming something else entirely. It was becoming a crossroads. The crossroads forced every unspoken fear into the open. This was no longer a discussion about improvement. It was about power, about who benefited from the existing rules, and who had been quietly constrained by them for years. The room carried a tension that had nothing to do with personalities and everything to do with consequence. The conflict sharpened as concrete proposals emerged. One path preserved the current framework with minor adjustments. Safer, familiar, defensible. It would calm stakeholders and maintain stability in the short term. The other path demanded something radical, rewriting core standards to favor openness, speed, and adaptability, even if it meant weakening the advantages of those who had dominated the industry for decades. No one argued lightly. Executives weighed reputational risk. Legal teams warned of uncertainty. Partners worried about fragmentation. And yet, the data remained relentless. Innovation was already escaping the boundaries of the system. The industry wasn't protecting value anymore, it was containing it. The emotional peak arrived when a quiet voice spoke again. What if protecting the industry means changing it before someone else does? That question reframed everything. The risk was no longer about action. It was about inaction. Because the longer they waited, the more control they surrendered to forces outside the room. Startups unconcerned with standards, platforms unconstrained by legacy, and customers increasingly indifferent to who set the rules as long as their needs were met. A final scenario was presented. If the industry led the transformation, it could shape the transition, preserve trust, and remain relevant. If it resisted, change would still happen, but without coordination, without safeguards, and without the leaders who believed they were protecting stability. The room went still. This was the emotional peak, the moment where everyone understood that neutrality was illusion. Choosing not to change was still a choice, and it carried consequences just as severe as acting boldly. The single meeting now held the weight of an entire ecosystem, and whatever decision followed would ripple far beyond that room, redefining not just how the industry operated, but who it was built to serve. They chose to lead the change, not unanimously, not without resistance, but with enough conviction to move forward before the industry fractured beyond repair. The decision didn't dismantle the old system overnight. It opened it, deliberately, carefully, and irreversibly. Standards were rewritten to favor interoperability over control. Barriers lowered to invite experimentation. Rules that once protected incumbents were reframed to support participation. It was a controlled release of pressure, designed to guide evolution rather than resist it. The reaction was immediate. Some leaders pushed back, warning of chaos. Others embraced the shift, sensing opportunity. New players entered the ecosystem, building faster than anyone predicted. Innovation accelerated. Trust, instead of eroding, redistributed, not anchored authority, but earned through responsiveness. This was the climax. The industry didn't collapse under change. It expanded. Value flowed in new directions. Companies once constrained by rigid frameworks began contributing at scale. Customers experienced choice without fragmentation. And the ecosystem evolved not by force, but by alignment. In the resolution, the impact became clear. The meeting that altered the industry wasn't remembered for its arguments or its risks. It was remembered for its timing, for recognizing that leadership isn't about preserving rules. It's about preserving relevance. The industry didn't lose its foundation. It rebuilt it to support a future already forming. Years later, analysts would point to that moment as inevitable. But inside the room, nothing felt inevitable. It felt uncertain, uncomfortable, and necessary. And that's how real change begins. Because sometimes all it takes to rewrite an industry is a single meeting and the courage to ask the question everyone else avoids. Subscribe to join the journey. A